Do you ever feel like your finances should be fine, but something still feels off? You're making money, paying your bills, doing what you're supposed to do, and still feel a level of stress that doesn't fully make sense. But most people assume that means they just need to make more money or manage it better. But most of the time, that's not what's actually happening. What you're really dealing with is your financial system, how your money is structured, how decisions are made, and how much effort it takes to manage it. And when that system isn't clear or aligned, even simple situations start to feel heavier than they should. We'll take a look at how to check this in a minute, but first, you need to see where this actually starts. So when this starts happening, most people try to fix it by focusing on the numbers. Earn more, spend less, try to stay on track, and sometimes that helps for a little while. And then the same feeling comes back, and this is where it gets misread, because it doesn't feel like something is broken. It just feels like money is always a little stressful. And that's not the real issue. What's actually happening isn't just about how much money you have. It's about how your system is functioning, how clear it is, how flexible it is, how much effort it takes to stay on top of it. Because when clarity isn't there, you don't just feel uncertain. You start avoiding decisions altogether. And once avoidance becomes part of the pattern, that's where the pressure begins to build. Most people hear financial wellness and think saving more money, budgeting better, being more disciplined, and those things do matter. But that's not really what this is about. Financial wellness is how your financial system supports your daily life, how clearly you understand your situation, and how easily you can make decisions without stress or hesitation. Once you look at it that way, something becomes really clear. It's not just about how much money you have, it's about how manageable your financial life feels. Because your financial system isn't neutral. It's either helping you stay clear, consistent, and in control, or it's quietly creating uncertainty that leads to stress, avoidance, and mental fatigue. And clarity is what stabilizes that system. Without it, even small decisions take more effort than they should. So what does financial resilience look like? When your financial system is working the way it should, this is where financial wellness starts to show up. Not in a big dramatic way, but in how your decisions actually feel. When your system is supporting you, you know where your money is going. You feel comfortable checking your finances instead of avoiding them. Decisions feel manageable, not overwhelming. And when something unexpected comes up, you adjust without feeling thrown off. And that's the part most people overlook. It's not just about having money, although that does matter. It's about having a system that holds up when things change. Now, compare that to when your system isn't supporting you. You hesitate to look at your accounts. You put off purchasing decisions. You feel pressure around things that should be simple. Instead of feeling in control, you feel uncertain. At a certain point, that carries forward because now it's not just one decision, it's a pattern. This is what it actually looks like in real life. You know you should check your finances, but keep putting it off. Not because you don't care, but because it feels heavier than it should. Or you make a decision and immediately second guess it. Even small choices start to feel like they carry too much weight. Or you try to follow a financial plan and it doesn't quite fit how you actually live. So you fall out of it and have to start all over again. As that cycle repeats, it creates a kind of financial pressure that doesn't fully settle. Nothing really stabilizes. And most people try to fix this by tightening control, instead of adjusting how their system is designed. Once you start to recognize that pattern, the next question becomes, where is this actually breaking down? Because it usually doesn't show up all at once. It appears in specific areas, often in ways you don't immediately connect. And none of it feels extreme, but it keeps repeating. That pattern is the signal. So as we go through this next part, pay attention to which one feels the most familiar to you. The first is financial awareness and clarity. For some people, it starts with awareness. You're not fully sure where your money is going. You check in occasionally, but not consistently. At times, you're guessing more than you realize. And when clarity isn't there, uncertainty fills the gap. That uncertainty makes decisions harder, which leads to hesitation and avoidance. The second is mindset and emotional response. Once uncertainty is present, your emotional response starts to shift. You feel stress when thinking about money. You hesitate before making decisions. Even small financial choices start to feel heavier than they should. And instead of approaching them clearly, you react to them. That reaction creates pressure, which makes the next decision even harder. The third is spending behavior and system fit. At this point, it starts to show up in how you spend. Your system doesn't fully match your habits. You try to follow a plan, but it feels restrictive or difficult to maintain, so you fall out of it. Then try again later. And each restart adds more frustration to the process. This leads us to number 4, structure and flexibility. When your system keeps breaking down like that, it usually points to a lack of flexibility. There's no room for real life. Unexpected expenses create more stress than they should. Small disruptions throw everything off. And instead of adapting, your system starts to feel fragile. 5, consistency and maintenance. Once that pattern sets in, consistency becomes a challenge. You start strong, then fall out of it. Avoid checking things for a while, then try to reset. And every time that cycle repeats, it becomes harder to stay engaged. Progress doesn't just slow down, it resets. And the important part is, you don't need all of those to be off. Even one of them can start creating pressure, which then affects everything else. This is where most people go in the wrong direction. They assume the problem is the amount of money, so they try to earn more, save more, control spending more tightly, and sometimes that helps for a while, but the same pressure returns because the structure hasn't changed. The mental load is still there, and instead of reducing stress, it shows up in different ways because this isn't just about money, it's about how your system is designed. And when that's off, more effort doesn't fix it, it just makes it harder to maintain. Once that pattern continues, this is where it starts to turn into something bigger. It's no longer just about finances. It begins to affect how you think, how you decide, and how much energy everyday situations require. You feel more pressure, more hesitation, less clarity, and over time, that creates a kind of mental fatigue that doesn't fully go away. This is where it shifts, because burnout isn't just about work or stress. It can come from systems that constantly require more effort than they should. And when your financial system keeps creating that pressure, it doesn't go away. It builds. And this is exactly why most people don't catch it early. Because when you're in the middle of it, you just feel the effects, not the structure behind them. It just feels like money is stressful or unclear or something you don't want to deal with right now. But underneath that, there's a pattern. And that's where having a way to step back and actually see how your financial system is working makes the difference. Because once you can see where clarity is missing, where pressure is building, and what's not working, you're not guessing anymore. This is where a structured self-assessment comes in. Something that helps you step back and actually see how this is working in your own life. And that's exactly what the financial wellness audit is designed to do. It turns something that feels unclear into something you can actually see. If you want to go through it for yourself, it's available on the Great Discovery platform. I've linked it in the description so you can find it easily, and I'll also pin it in the comments. And in the next video, we're going to look at another area that might be affecting you in a completely different way, but is just as important when it comes to staying consistent and avoiding burnout. I'll see you in that one.